how good are you at finishing things? When it comes to tea, I'm not great. How good are you at finishing things? I was telling somebody recently that I could never be a car salesman because I'm not a finisher. I kind of don't have that killer instinct at the end. You know, I might be all right for saying, well, come and have a look at this car, showing them round, demonstrating the smoothness of the ride, the blue colour, looking under the engine and going, it's got an engine. I might be good at all those kind of things, but I'd be rubbish at finishing because I would never ask the question, so when are you going to buy it? I'd never ask that because it's kind of awkward. I am not a great finisher. Take my garden, for example. I haven't got a very big garden at all, or me and Jan haven't got a very big garden. And until very recently, I've had a raised vegetable patch. If you know what that is. It kind of stood about that high. If you're at the back and you can't see, it stood about that high. And I guess so you can easily get, I don't know why, get into it, and it looks kind of the right thing. And it kind of worked all right for quite a few years. The potatoes absolutely loved it. Had a harvest of potatoes every year, dug out every single potato and bit of potato, and the next year, more potatoes. Just couldn't get rid of the potatoes. The rosemary loved it. The rosemary bush kind of took over half the patch. And mint. Rosemary, mint, potatoes. What more do you need? My crowning glory for it all was I planted 2 avocado stones in my raised. I grew, you can laugh, I grew avocado trees, 2 of them. I know, they didn't last the winter, and I kind of should have thought about that, but I did. Anyway, this was kind of all okay until kind of the wooden slats started to rot a bit and it began to look a bit ropey. And I thought, we don't really need this, so I'll take everything down and replace it with paving. Put some paving down, the barbecue could go on it, look much neater. Do you know how much soil there is in a raised garden about that big, which is only about 5 foot by 4 foot? And what do you do with all that soil? We don't have a big garden, and the garden we do have is now like a foot higher than everywhere else, where I've dumped the soil, and the tip, I think, got fed up of me bringing blue bags of soil. Anyway, kind of got rid of all the soil and got rid of all the wooden slats, and I'm very pleased to say that right now it's just kind of a mess. It's kind of like the earth is everywhere. And we got to a stage a couple of weeks back where I went, I don't think I'm ever going to get to actually paving this. So, and I spotted something in Homebase, and I've now bought a frame that looks like a vegetable bed, except it won't be raised. But there you go. So I've kind of got that to do. I'm just not very good at finishing things. How about you? Anybody else in the same boat? Anybody else got a job at home which they've been thinking, yeah, I will finish that sometime? It's that last little bit of decorating, changing something. It's just me. Is it literally just me? Oh, thanks, Eddie. Phew. Having said all that, what I want to say to you this morning is you don't have to finish everything you've started. There are some projects that are best abandoned. Unfortunately, my vegetable patch isn't one of them. But there's some things that if they're left unfinished, they're not going to amount to a hill of beans. Really doesn't matter. So this morning, I'm not here to get you to finish everything, but my desire is to encourage you to finish the right thing. You don't have to finish everything, but finish the right thing. We've been looking at this idea that we are created in the image of God, and therefore the way we are and what we should look like ought to be very God-like. And of course, as we've said, we have Jesus as the template for this. And I think, kind of as we get to the end of this series, this is kind of one of those less obvious traits of the image of God. And that is that he is a finisher, that he finishes strong. The writer to the Hebrews penned these words that we probably know really well. Let us run the race that is before us and never give up. Let's run the race that's before us and never give up. Now, we could read that as, let's just make sure we get to the end, shall we? However we do it, persevere, hang on until the very end, and all will be well. It can feel like that's all we need to do. However we do it, let's just drag ourselves to the very end. We talk about getting to the end of the race, but as we get closer to the end, is it okay to just sit back? Oh, that would be nice. Ooh. Put our feet up. Relax. Don't give me that look because I got my feet on the coffee table. And just be content. Is that okay? Just happy with our lot. Doing the crossword every day. Looking at the vegetable patch growing. Maybe that even kind of describes something of our experience currently at church. Are we just content coming into church? Content to sit and soak, stand and sing? Content to be here for an hour? Content to know exactly what's going to happen, in what order? Content that nothing will rock the boat? Maybe content's not exactly the right word. Maybe complacent, somewhere in between content. Content. It's a funny word, content, when you've said it about 8 times. Content and there is a word somewhere between content and complacent, and those who've been teachers, Linda will tell us what it is afterwards, okay? What that word is. Brilliant, fantastic. Maybe that's kind of how you feel about church. On one occasion, Jesus told a story about talents being handed out. It says, again, he said, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag. I know you probably will know these words as talents rather than bags of gold. Maybe it helps us to understand a bit more kind of in our situation. He gave them out according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who'd received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in his vegetable patch and hid his master's money. The third guy got 1 bag of gold and he kept it safe. And when called upon, he handed it back. But he was berated for being complacent. He could have done something with it. He could have made it more than it was. But he decided it's okay buried. And he put his feet up and relaxed until the master came back. Maybe we shouldn't be content with the status quo, even in church. After Jesus was crucified, then risen from the dead, he was with the disciples for 40 days. Then he was taken into heaven. The disciples gathered together. They were waiting for something to happen. They were in this place we call the upper room. They weren't sure what was going to happen, but they were eagerly awaiting. And what happened changed everything. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. When the Spirit fell, these followers were changed forever. I kind of wonder in my head, it's a good place to wonder, I wonder if in the months the weeks to follow, they were ever simply content to sit through a church service. Or whether they longed for something else to happen, whether they longed for the Spirit to fall afresh, whether they longed for God to powerfully speak. I wonder. I want to talk about finishing strong, but not necessarily finishing content or complacent or giving up. Finishing, still looking, waiting for that next move of God, that next voice from God. Finishing, waiting for the next time the Spirit falls in a worship service or being transported somewhere else during our prayer time. So my one question I want you to take away this morning is simply this: how determined are you to finish strong? How determined are you to finish strong? Finishing strong. Not just settling, but pushing in. Let us run the race before us and never give up. I don't think it helps, if I'm being honest, when we read about finishing the race, when we have like hundreds of kind of marathons now and half marathons and the Great North Run and kind of those, those long distance runs. And like with the London Marathon, there's, how many people take place in the London Marathon? I mean, it's millions and, no, millions is mad, isn't it? It's not millions. 40,000, something like that? A lot of people that if we got £1 off each, we'd make a lot of money. I know it's kind of that many people. Lots of people. I don't think it really helps that we have all these and more people than ever have run a marathon. More than ever before. And every year, more and more people are running a marathon. And so much is made of finishing the marathon. And I don't want to decry that because kind of it takes effort to get to the finishing line. And looking round, I'm not sure that more than 10 or 12 of us could probably manage that in here. But, and here's what kind of goes in my head really. It's not really a race for most, is it? It's not really a race. It's about getting to the end somehow, limping over the line, just getting there. In fact, they make a thing on the news of the one guy who's like, he's literally, I'm going over there, cameras, he's literally like coming into the finishing line and the leg, and somebody comes and grabs him and picks him up and helps him over the line, and then the clock shows that he's done it in 9 hours and 20 minutes, and it's like, it's not really a race. You can walk the whole way around and get a medal, which, is still 26 miles, and it would take something to do that, but you're not in a race. You are not in a race. And so when we read, let us run the race before us and never give up, it can kind of feel like if we think about it in terms of marathons and long distance and just got to get to the end, it devalues the text because we make finishing something that is possibly easier to do than it actually is. We can finish by just ambling, by limping over the finishing line. We can do it without too much effort. That's a far cry from the men and women who form the elite race and train really hard daily to properly compete in the race. They're running the race. Do you get that? Everybody else is getting around 26 miles, but they're not racing. So, how do we run the race to finish strong, not content to settle, not complacent, but strong to the end and properly run the race? Because the image of God we see in Jesus shows us a man, albeit in God in human form, who was strong to the very end, who knew firsthand all the intricate meanings of the word perseverance, who knew what it meant to kind of go through all the hard things, to hit the wall, and to keep racing to the very end. Think of this as an example. I could look back on my time at Greenfinch. Did I tell you that I'm retiring soon? I may have mentioned it to one or two of you. I could look back on my time and say, do you know, I think my best work here was in the early days when we baptized, was it 8 or 10 people in the sea at Sizewell on one day? That was my best times. Or I could say, I think my best times here were when we kind of grew to a stage and had to move to Gusford School. And kind of things were growing in numbers. That could be my best time about 10 years ago. Or maybe it was kind of after COVID that hit us just so hard, and the fact that everybody came back together after COVID, bless you, maybe that was my best time. But wouldn't it be great to be able to say that I finished strong and my best time was right at the very end of my tenure? Jesus' best work was his final work, and his strongest step was his last step. Jesus is the best example of one who persevered, endured to the end, finishing strong. Have a listen to the way the writer to the Hebrews talks about this. And I'm going to use the version of the Message, which I know is a transliteration. Yeah, any of those things. Anyway, it's not the King James for those who are that way inclined. The writer to the Hebrews says, do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on. It means we'd better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor, right alongside God. When you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he plowed through. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls. So I want to spend just 5 minutes just thinking about that example of Jesus. Because Jesus held on. And the fact that we're told he held on implies he could have let go. He could have quit. He could have walked away from everything. But he didn't. He kept going while wicked people were doing evil things to him. While evil things were coming into his life and against him, he could have given up. For one, think about the temptation he faced in life. I decided about a week ago that it's getting out of hand. Thank you. At least somebody's going, no, that's not the case. So I decided I give up sugar, which is like my downfall. So I've given up sugar for an indeterminate period of time. I've currently done 3 days, 11 hours and 29 minutes. And to be honest, at times it's a little bit of a struggle. The temptation is around. I've tried to get rid of as much temptation as possible. But it's amazing even when you get rid of all the biscuits and cakes and chocolates and sweets in the house, what other things you can use to make sweet things. Temptation's kind of still there. And I struggle especially after a meal. I've never been a smoker, but I imagine it's kind of like those people who, after a meal, crave a cigarette For me, a meal's not finished without pudding, cake, biscuit, packet of sweets. I'm saying kind of any of those, not all, obviously, at the same time. So it's a struggle being tempted. Jesus faced way more than my sugar things. Just think about where we read about Jesus being led into the desert. The Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness where the devil tempted Jesus for 40 days. And if you know that story well, I think the story writer pulls out 3 things that Jesus was tempted over, specifically. But Satan was at him the whole time. It wasn't like those were just the 3 things and the rest of the time Jesus was sat there with his feet up. We're told the devil tempted Jesus for 40 days. And it wasn't like Satan tried to tempt Jesus. It wasn't like Satan attempted to tempt Jesus. He tempted Jesus. And since he was tempted, he could have given in. He could have quit the race. But he didn't. He kept running. Temptation didn't stop him. And neither did accusations. I mean, we've all been around the block a time or two, and probably you faced accusations in your life. Some that might have got you thinking that, all this just isn't worth it. Might as well just pack it in. You know, those accusations that come from maybe friends, and you kind of think, might as well just throw it all away. Do you know you're in good company? Jesus too faced accusations from people you wouldn't necessarily expect. John 7 says, among the crowds there was widespread whispering about him. Some said he's a good man. Others replied, no, he deceives people. John 8 says, the Jews answered him, aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed? That's what happened to Jesus. His own family thought he was crazy. His neighbors treated him badly. In fact, there's this one time when he returns to his hometown and they try to throw him off a cliff. Ever had that? I mean, you struggle to find a cliff around here, but that kind of thing. Jesus didn't stop but kept going. Temptations didn't defeat him, and accusations didn't defeat him, and nor did shame. If we kind of expand our opening text, it says, let us look only to Jesus, the one who began our faith and who makes it perfect. He suffered death on the cross, but he accepted the shame as if it were nothing because of the joy that God put before him. And now he's sitting at the right side of God's throne. Think about Jesus' example. He held on while wicked people were doing evil things to him. So do not get tired and stop trying. You remember last week we talked about dwelling on a verse or two. Just rather than kind of reading a whole lot of text and going, oh, that's the story. Just dwelling on a verse or two. Well, right in the middle of this passage are the words, he accepted the shame as if it were nothing. I mean, temptations are not nice. Accusations can be horrible. But surely shame is the worst. Shame is that thing that gets deep within us. It's often unseen and therefore kind of worse than these other things. And imagine if that shame was totally unjustified. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus was shamed before his family, stripped naked before his mother and loved ones, forced to carry a cross so heavy that the weight caused him to stumble, condemned to die a criminal's death. Shame. Yet worse still, the shame Jesus felt before his Father, bearing the collective shame of all humanity. How did he keep going? How did Jesus keep running the race till the end? How did he actually finish the race strongly? Not just dragging himself across the finishing line, not just content to get there somehow, but finishing so strong with his greatest triumph coming at the end. Let us look only to Jesus, the one who began our faith and who makes it perfect. He suffered death on the cross, but he accepted the shame as if it were nothing because of the joy that God set before him. In his final moments, Jesus focused on the prize. He could finish strong because he focused on the prize of heaven, the joy set before him. So we're encouraged to finish strong too. Not simply content with our lot, not finish kind of dragging ourselves across the line, not finishing with our feet up and a cup of tea in our hands, but finishing, still pushing in for what God has for us. Not complacent because the church is going all right and it's nice and it's familiar, but pushing into what God has in store for us. And to push to the end with our own individual Christian walk too. You see, just like me and my vegetable patch and taking the slats down and getting rid of the dirt and all that, we all know that initial burst of enthusiasm when we start a new project, that inspiration and energy that kickstarts us. But perhaps we also know those moments when the energy levels drop, when the inspiration seeps away, when we seriously consider giving up, when it just seems like such a lonely path that we're treading. And then what do we do? I want to leave you with the words of an author sharing how he gets to the end and what drives him to the finishing post to complete the race, to finish strong. He says, "Here is where I find the strength to finish. Through years of writing at least one book a year, I've developed a ritual. Upon completion of a project, I enjoy a rite of celebration. It involves two phases. The first is a quiet moment with God." We talked about that last week. He says, "The moment the manuscript is in the mail, I find a secluded spot and stop. I don't say much, neither does God. The purpose is not to talk as much as it is to relish, to delight in the sweet satisfaction of a completed task. The runner feels the tape against his chest. It is finished." He says, "How sweet the wine at the end of the journey. God and I savor it together. Then," and this I know is going to sound really mundane, but he says, "Then, secondly, I eat. The food may vary and the company may change, but one rule remains constant. Throughout the meal, I allow myself only one thought. I am finished. Planning future projects is not permitted. Consideration of tomorrow's tasks is not allowed. I indulge myself in a make-believe world that pretends that my life's work is complete." And it kind of feels like I'm going away from what I've been saying the whole time, but bear with me, because this last sentence he says is so important. He says, "And during that meal, in a minute way, I understand where Jesus found his strength. He lifted his eyes beyond the horizon and saw the table. He focused on the feast, and what he saw gave him strength to finish and finish strong. Such a moment awaits us. We will take our place at the table, surrounded by saints and engulfed by Jesus himself. The work will indeed be finished. The final harvest will have been gathered. We will be seated, and Christ will open the meal with these words, 'Well done, good and faithful servant.' And in that moment, the race will have been worth it. In that moment, all that kind of temptation that's tried to pull us away and our fighting against it will have been worth it. In that moment, all those accusations that have been plowed onto us and kind of tempted us again to pull back will be worth it. In that moment, those moments of shame that we've got through and kept on running past will be worth it. In that moment, the race itself will have been worth it. Let us run the race before us and never give up. Let me pray. Lord, it's easy to talk about these things and kind of just go, well, that's the way it is. But we know that it's a lot harder to run the race and keep running the race and finish strong than it is just to read words and talk about these things. So I want to pray for each of us today that you will come into us afresh, that your Spirit will touch us afresh, that you will strengthen us anew to just keep going, to push in for everything that you have for us as a church and for us as individuals and for our families too. That we would run strong, keeping our eyes on the prize of heaven which is awaiting for us, but not just kind of dragging ourselves over the line, but sprinting at the end. That maybe even like Jesus, our best work, our strongest work, our most significant step will come right at the end because we keep pushing in on this race. Help us with that, I pray. In Jesus' name. Amen.